Fundamentally, when we look at the purpose of a politician within Western democracy, the only purpose of a politician is to really represent all of our views in one place, so that ideally the best ideas can have it out, and what people want is what is executed. We know that in practice that's not what actually happens, because we have this flawed dependency on the people that are meant to execute those ideas. We don't really need politicians anymore because we have the internet, and how we might figure out the framework for how our ideas are executed to govern us in the future, those details we need to nut out. But we don't really need politicians anymore. We do need civil servants, people that execute those ideas, but we do not need people to choose what ideas are executed for us. What we need is a framework that determines how those ideas are executed. And I think that if we can figure that out, we'd be eliminating a lot of the problems of our current system. You know, when you look at something like communism or some forms of socialism, the reason why they're quite dangerous is because they have no awareness within their system of human corruption. So when you design a system that has no self-awareness of corruption as an issue, then it has no immune system that can deal with that problem. When we look at democracy, it's actually been somewhat of a misnomer and an Orwellian switch that we've had pulled on us. Democracy is not really what made America great. We've had some gap where we've forgotten that the true ideas of America that made it great were that it was a decentralized republic, and where these United States of America became the United States of America, and you had more and more federal power, more and more essentially veto power given to federal government, where federal government can pretty much override anything. That was a key mistake, and it's not what I believe was originally intended. Because anytime you have a top-down structure, then you're going to have vulnerabilities, and the vulnerability there is corruption. It becomes very difficult to eliminate corruption within any top-down system like that. And it's pretty obvious that when you look at why there were so many states created in the first place, that it was because of decentralization and a desire to make sure that the ideas could have it out, you could still meet and talk about what ideas your state was going to execute, but in the end, the state should have had the ability to determine what goes on there. As soon as you have a federal government, you've pretty much thrown away any idea of a republic, and we only talk about democracy anymore. But when we start talking about a two-party system, we've really thrown it all away. So I think we need to, go back a little bit and figure out what was so great about that blueprint, because it did have some pretty amazing ideas in there, but we've forgotten what happened within our history, probably through our own education and whatnot. It's really interesting that we don't really know why some people say these United States or the United States, but I believe that the difference is one between these United States being a decentralized republic and the United States being one under a single federal government. So perhaps there are some really good ideas that we could revive around that. You can build system integrity through decentralization, and you have to think really carefully about if you choose to centralize some ideas like street signage or some things like that that need to be standardized. You need to be really careful about how it's done, and you need to be designing your system in a way that takes this into account, where you recognize that when you do that, you're exposing the entire country or system to a vulnerability whenever you have any centralized decision making. And in order to handle that problem, I don't think it's actually difficult to do everything that would require that kind of centralized decision making by referendum. So any kind of decision that we think needs to be standardized, you can do it all through referendum on the web, whereby every single person chooses to take part in that. Obviously, it's still at will. There's going to be people that may not take part, but I believe that's better than handing over my power to one person, and I only get a chance every 4 or more years to change who that person may be, and they don't have to actually execute what they promised they would. So there are all sorts of things that we could do with that kind of system, provided we were able to make sure that the electronic component of it was secure, that perhaps something like the way Linux operates is a really good template for security, to look at how an open source system like Linux is the most secure operating system in the world, arguably, and to consider how could we maybe build a software platform that ran our government in a similar way. Transparency is really important. Anytime you create secrecy around design around something, then you're going to create vulnerabilities that can remain hidden and exploited. So again, secrecy versus transparency on open sourcing of the software that might run the platform needs to be considered. There are some other ideas about how it might work, there are obviously some people that might have great ideas about what should be executed, and so then how do you give those ideas visibility so that they can be seen and then voted upon by people? And in order to deal with that, it's really hard to design a system that gives ideas the right visibility, because by hiding visibility on ideas that some people might not want, if the system was designed in a way to hide those ideas, that could be dangerous. So that is something that would require awareness. But I do quite like the idea of me being able to say, assign my vote on certain topics to people that I am aligned with on certain issues. So there might be someone who I generally align with on healthcare issues, but a different person when it comes to tax issues. And my votes could, by default, work with that person, and that person has an aggregated power of whoever is aligned with them. But there's a fundamental difference here between a system designed like that and how our current political system would work, because I would have the ability to reassign my vote at my will at any time in real time, so there'd never be any danger of a person misusing their aggregated abilities of being able to, say, have 10,000 votes assigned to them on a particular bill. So if I'm watching some person and there's a bill going through to change how healthcare for disability is about to operate, I can observe that person, and they would have to declare that they intend to move in a particular direction on a bill. They can't just switch. And if I don't agree with them up until the point where the bill goes through, I have the ability to, in real time, reassign my vote any way I wish. So this could give us some really amazing abilities in being able to distribute our own will, but also allow the system to run itself in certain ways when in an efficient way, because not everyone can be connected to that kind of government interface all the time, or can be bothered with it necessarily. But so you're going to want to align your ideas to different people on certain issues to run in this default mode until there's things that are really of key importance where you might choose to research and alter your decision making. I think there are some other really interesting possible side effects by running a system in this way. Initially you might have some people voting for things that might seem crazy to others, and I think the beauty of running a system like this is that we need to be allowed to make mistakes. because we get the feedback, and through the feedback of making mistakes, we can create awareness and continued interest. That changes our intelligence for being able to deal with problems. I think also it deals with a problem that we have of apathy. People don't feel connected to the way their government runs things, or to the way decisions are executed that have power over them. And that makes people feel apathetic and care less about their government, and hence the voting problem in so many countries. So, this kind of system could potentially deal with that through feeling that direct feedback. We can change how apathetic people are towards the way things are currently running. And on that note, I think it is really important to consider how we decentralize decision making. How do we concentrate the most amount of power in the smallest space, so that a village of 100 people has the ability to properly govern themselves, and larger areas have the ability to govern themselves differently. And we have to really ask that question, because the more and more you dilute everyone's voting ability, the less and less relevant decisions become for everyone, because the decisions that are made for some small village aren't the same as the decisions that might be made for some big city on the coast. All sorts of things have to be taken into account. So I think that asking the question, how do we decentralize in the right way to create interest, a lack of apathy, and increased system integrity, because by decentralizing decision execution in different locations, you're creating a greater buffer for dealing with corruption. So these are all ideas that I don't really see in play right now, but I think that they could provide amazing solutions for how we govern ourselves. And if you're a politician out there, I put it to you that if you agree with these kinds of ideas, that the highest thing that we could do right now is to try and execute this, and try and push these things forward and figure out how we do it. I think that if these ideas are right, or if these ideas are true enough that they're on the right track, then ideally the best politicians would be trying to design themselves out of their own job. That sounds really challenging, but at the very least, I see those roles as being able to be transferred into roles of being civil servants, and instead of trying to aggregate our will and us give up our own decision-making power, to figure out how do we best execute everyone's will in the highest integrity.